Okay, if everyone could please take their seats. We have a lot to cover tonight. Grab some wine, take it back to your seat. That's okay, that's acceptable. It is vegan wine. We have a lot to cover tonight. Here's our schedule for tonight. We're going to go till 8 o'clock with the lecture because I want to cover a lot. Then 15 minutes for food and a break, but you can take the food back to your seat along with more wine. So how sober you stay is completely up to you. We have designated drivers. They're waiting for you outside in the parking lot.
Oh, this is good. What did I just have?
The question is whether I should have some wine. Probably not. So welcome, everybody. We're going to try to wrap up this lecture series in some reasonable, logical way. I hope it works. Tonight we're going to be talking about some kind of scientific things, but I'm going to try to keep it entertaining. And it is hoped that you will go away from here having a better ability to look at scientific information, papers, and how they get interpreted and misinterpreted. For one thing, the scientists who write the papers often misinterpret them, right? So you should be just as good at understanding them as they are. So, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. So here's our schedule. I'm going to try to finish by 8 o'clock, and then we'll take 15 minutes for food, and then the second part of the lecture really only takes 30 or 35 minutes, so that should leave us with at least 15 minutes for questions. So we got to start with a cartoon. And you're a bunch of animal lovers, right? So anyway, okay. So that was for Paul. So who is our hero? Well, he wrote Whole, and there he is, T. Colin Campbell, right? And it just occurred to me while I was working on this lecture that he's really a Jedi master.
I love it.
So we're going to start thinking of him as Obi-Wan Campbell. In fact, I have not told him that yet. You want to tell him? So what is reductionism? Here's the long definition of reductionism. It's a philosophical position which holds that a complex system is nothing but the sum of its parts, and that an account of it can be reduced to accounts of individual constituents. This can be said of objects, phenomena, explanations, theories, and meanings. That's complicated. I'm going to shorten it, don't worry. Holism is the idea that natural systems, physical, biological, chemical, social, economic, mental, linguistic, etc., and their properties should be viewed as wholes, not as collections of parts. This often includes the view that systems function as wholes and that their functioning cannot be fully understood solely in terms of their component parts. I shortened it, though. So reductionism is a natural system is nothing but the sum of its parts, and it can be fully understood if its individual parts are understood. Kind of like Descartes figuring that everything was like, a machine, right? Holism is a natural system is more than the sum of its parts and cannot be fully understood solely in terms of its parts. And a lot of that has to, if you've followed chaos theory or quantum theory, you hear all these really crazy things like the cat's in the box and it's dead or it's alive. We don't know because until we open the box, we don't know. So these things they're kind of probabilities, and you can't really predict things from initial, what's the term? So yeah, from inception. Anyway, thank you. There's a word that I've lost, even without the wine, which I haven't had yet, but just thinking about it. Okay, so here's an example of when reductionism fails, and I've mentioned this to you earlier. The smokers in Finland. This was an article published in 1994. So, bless you. So it's a fact. It's a known fact that smokers who eat more vegetables have less lung cancer. And it's a fact that vegetables contain lots of antioxidants, including beta-carotene. And it's a fact that smokers given beta-carotene pills get more lung cancer. Isn't that crazy? Here's the article. It's from the New England Journal, 1994. And don't worry, I've summarized it as usual. So here's the background. Epidemiologic evidence indicates that diets high in carotenoid-rich fruits and vegetables, as well as high serum levels of vitamin E and beta-carotene, are associated with a reduced risk of lung cancer. So we performed a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled primary prevention trial to determine whether daily supplementation with vitamin E or beta-carotene or both would reduce the incidence of lung cancer and other cancers. They had a total of roughly 30,000 male smokers in Finland, ages 50 to 69. And they were randomly assigned to one of 4 regimens. They got vitamin E alone, beta-carotene alone, vitamin E and beta-carotene together, or a placebo. And they were followed for 5 to 8 years. And the results, unexpectedly, we observed a higher incidence of lung cancer among the men who received beta-carotene than among those who did not. And it was about an 18%, so sorry, the total mortality was 8% higher among the participants who received beta-carotene than among those who did not, primarily because there were more deaths from lung cancer and ischemic heart disease. There was also an 18% increased risk of lung cancer. So we gave them beta-carotene, which we think is good, right? It's a vitamin. So that's why we take multivitamins, because they're good for us, right? But actually, if you do the study, it's not true. So conclusion, we found no reduction in the incidence of lung cancer among male smokers after 5 to 8 years of dietary supplementation with vitamin E or beta-carotene. In fact, this trial raises the possibility that these supplements may actually have harmful as well as beneficial effects. So this is a co-author of Whole.
Hey, Howard Jacobson here, contributing author to Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition with Dr. T. Colin Campbell. You've heard the expression, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So one of Dr. Campbell's graduate students at Cornell, Dr. Liu, got real curious about the health effects of an apple. So here's what he did. In the lab, he took an apple and took about 100 grams of apple, that's roughly a half a cup, and measured the antioxidant vitamin C-like activity in that apple. And he got about 1,500 milligrams. Now, your typical vitamin C supplement is 500 milligrams, so this was 3 times the amount that you would take in a normal supplement. So far, so good. But then, Dr. Liu and his team measured the actual amount of vitamin C in the apple. And you know how much they found? 5.7 milligrams. 1,500 milligrams of activity, 5.7 milligrams of vitamin C. That is a 263 times difference that could not be accounted for by any of our known scientific understandings, theories, explanations, or measurements. It's as if you have $100 in the bank and yet you have an ATM card that allows you to take out $26,300 off of that 100. So the question is, what accounts for the rest of the antioxidant properties of the apple if it's not the vitamin C? 1,500 versus less than 6. Now the problem here is really that we have names for certain nutrients in food that we think are important, and if we don't have a name for it, it's like it doesn't even exist, it doesn't even matter. Later on, Dr. Liu's team looked at a whole bunch of other antioxidant-like substances in apples, quercetin, names I don't even remember and can't pronounce, tons of stuff, but the point is, whatever we found, there's still more that we haven't found. It's as if I were to say to you, look, let me give you a music lesson. C major scale. The base of the C major scale is the bass note C, and then the third E, and the fifth G, and then the octave C. C, E, G, C. Forgive me if I don't have perfect pitch. And so let's say that's the important stuff. Everything else is unimportant. So let's sing a song using the important notes. How about do, deer? Do, deer, female deer, then, me, name, I call my, you get the point. Just because it's the important stuff doesn't mean that we can understand, appreciate, or get value out of the whole song without the rest. And in nutrition, things are so unimaginably complex that once we take individual nutrients out of context and say these are the important things, you don't need to eat the apple, just take 3 vitamin C pills. We're missing the really big picture. I'm Howard Jacobson, contributing author to Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition. Thanks for watching.
So just to summarize what he said was the guy took an apple and measured, took 100 grams of this apple and measured the vitamin C activity, not the amount of vitamin C, but how much vitamin C-like activity there was. In other words, if you were to eat the apple, that's how much vitamin C your body would be perceiving in a sense. And he got 1,500 milligrams, but the actual measure of the amount of vitamin C, much, much less. So what he's basically getting at here is that nutrition is so complicated that trying to approach it from a reduction, not that we can't understand it, we can understand nutrition, but we can't understand it from that type of reductionist approach. So this is an article that I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about. And this was published in the New England Journal in April of this year. And it's referred to as the PREDIMED study. And it has to do with the Mediterranean diet. So we're going to spend some time on this. You know, usually I rush through these things. This one we're going to spend time on. So in a multi-center trial in Spain, we randomly assigned about 7,500 participants who were at high cardiovascular risk but with no cardiovascular disease at enrollment to one of three diets: a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil, a Mediterranean diet supplemented with mixed nuts, or a control diet, and these people were advised to reduce dietary fat. Participants received quarterly individual and group educational sessions, and depending on group assignment, free provision of extra virgin olive oil. So they were given olive oil. Once a week they were delivered for free a liter of olive oil. Or, that was the one group, or they were given mixed nuts or a small non-food gift. So the mixed nuts, they'd come to your house and give you a bag of nuts. Or if you were in the control group, you got a small non-food gift like a frying pan or, I don't know, a pot holder or something. The primary endpoint was the rate of major cardiovascular events, major cardiovascular events meaning myocardial infarction, stroke, or death from cardiovascular cause. On the basis of the results of an interim analysis, the trial was actually stopped after 4.8 years because the control group was doing so badly compared to the others that they felt they had to stop because it wasn't fair that they weren't on the Mediterranean diet. And that happens sometimes when you do a study. Any questions so far? Okay. And the conclusion, among persons at high cardiovascular risk, a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil or nuts reduced the incidence of major cardiovascular events. This came out in April. Anybody remember the news about the Mediterranean diet? Okay. Now I'm going to show you that a video that was on the New York Times website about this.
A rigorous study points to the benefits of a Mediterranean diet. I'm David Gillen for the New York Times. Gina Colada has been following the story, and she joins me now in the newsroom. Hey, Gina, thanks for coming in.
Good to be
so,
here.
The broad outlines of these findings seem to confirm what a lot of us have been hearing for a long time: a Mediterranean diet rich in olive oil and nuts and beans and fish and vegetables and fruit. It's good for us, maybe a little wine too. But it's the magnitude of the benefits that seem to have startled some experts. Why is this all so significant?
It's kind of amazing because these are people who were at high risk for heart disease, and they were taking drugs like statins that lower your cholesterol. So you say, well, how much more benefit are you going to get by just changing your diet? And they got a benefit, a 30% reduction in the things you care about: heart attacks, strokes, and deaths from heart disease. And that was as big a benefit as you would get if you had high cholesterol and took a statin, which was astonishing. I mean, it's like a drug effect. And what they did was they went on this diet.
And this was in the New England Journal of Medicine out today.
That's right.
Okay. You were telling me, though, that a lot of this is the diet. It's not as easy as you think.
Yeah, it's really funny because we all think we have such a good diet.
Right.
And before the study started, they had the people fill out a questionnaire telling what they were eating and what their diet was. And we're actually going to have that on the web. And I tried it, and I said, I have such a great diet. I was just where they were when the study started. I was at the same level. I wasn't eating a Mediterranean diet, although I have olive oil and fruits and vegetables. It wasn't enough. This diet is kind of unusual. And if you think you're eating a healthy diet, you probably are, but I bet you aren't doing what they say.
Well, you were telling me that I was amazed. You were saying like eat all the almonds you want,
all
eat all the olive oil you want.
Right,
and I'm thinking, and I said to you, well, wait a minute, I'm going to packing on even more weight than I'm already packing on. But
they said all the nuts you want except at meals because it's so filling. And they said that they looked at studies and they didn't. And people who ate all the nuts they wanted and just poured on the olive oil, they didn't gain weight. And I think it's because these things are so filling. In fact, that's why they said don't have nuts at meals. Any other time, you can eat them all day.
Okay.
All what they call black chocolate, which I think is dark chocolate.
Right, dark, really heavy, high in the cocoa or whatever.
At least 50% cocoa, all you want.
Wow.
All you want.
It sounds like a dream diet.
I know.
It sounds like a dream diet.
It was weird.
Look, this is lit up, nytimes.com. I think we have, at this hour, we have almost more than 300 comments or so from readers. And one thing that I noticed was that people were kind of critical of the U.S. for only sort of catching on to this now and only having this formal study now. And they're wondering why we haven't done a study like this before.
It's really hard. People thought it was almost impossible. In fact, one person who was a former president of the Heart Association congratulated them on doing a study that's almost impossible to do. Because just think about it. You take about 7,000 people and you say, for years, you're going to eat what I tell you to eat.
Right, sure.
Most
I
of
can
us would
understand
say,
that.
I don't want to be in that study. I like what I'm eating now, or I think I'm eating a great diet. Why would I want to be
Right.
in your study?
Right.
So they actually managed to get these people to do well, the low-fat people had a lot of trouble. And if you saw what they were supposed to eat, you would have a lot of trouble
Okay,
too, I
like
think.
what were they? It's like
They were supposed
like
to
nothing.
Yeah, like nothing.
Like lettuce.
Yeah, like the kind of things that are very hard for people to sustain.
All right.
But the people on the Mediterranean diet, they actually were measuring chemicals in their blood or in urine that were showing whether they're actually eating the nuts and the oils, and they were counseling them and stuff. These people actually did it. They actually changed their diets and stayed with it.
Okay.
And they say, oh, this is such a good diet, but when you think about it, you're supposed to have fish 3 times a week. At least one is a fatty
Right.
fish like salmon.
Right.
And my husband said, well, you know, who's going to go out and buy this fish? I said, well, we could have like canned mackerel. He said,
No.
I don't want that.
Exactly.
You just eat legumes 3 times a week?
All right. The other thing that came up in these comments was whether all these foods, you know, olive oil, nuts, fish, vegetables, are good, or whether, particularly here, they're actually just replacing something that's bad.
Well, that's a really good question, and nobody knows because this
Okay.
whole thing is sort of black magic. It's like they took a diet that people used to eat in the old days before
Yeah.
they had processed foods and stuff, and they said they had less heart disease then. And they said, we'll just take that diet and that's what you'll eat. So they don't know which component is really great and which one is just sort of replacing something. Do you really have to eat legumes 3 times a week? Who knows? Do you really?
Right.
One of the things that also was interesting, you're supposed to make a tomato sauce. And you're supposed to
You make your
simmer,
own.
make your own. Simmer tomatoes slowly in lots of olive oil, of course, with garlic and onions. And then you're supposed to use that at least twice a week on pasta, rice, or vegetables. Now, is that important? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. But
Okay.
they have it in there.
Is there anything else? I mean, for all these people out here who are watching this
Yeah.
now, and because we've been reading a lot about the Mediterranean diet, as I said, for a long time.
Right.
Is there anything that came out of this study that's like, okay, this is like the 2 or 3 things I need to adjust in my diet?
They say it's the package. And if you're really
Package.
curious, you'll see we have for tomorrow's paper, we have something telling you what you have to eat. And we have the quiz so you can see how well you're doing. And you might be surprised because, like me, you might think, oh, I have such a great diet. And it's not,
Turns out.
not the Mediterranean diet. It might be good. It's not Mediterranean.
Got it. Gina, thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's all for now. I'm David Gillen for the New York Times.
I don't know where to start with that. But I don't have to, because our friend Howard Jacobson, the one who told you about the vitamin C, he has a really great analysis. So I'm just going to do the lazy thing and show you his analysis, okay?
So what's the truth about the Mediterranean diet? Is it really a health miracle or just more misguided diet hype? Hi, I'm Howard Jacobson, contributing author to Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition. The Mediterranean diet is nothing new. There's already a lot of cookbooks out about it, and it's clearly the diet to choose if you have 28 days to look amazing in a yellow bikini. But recently, a study came out suggesting that the Mediterranean diet is the world's healthiest diet. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and you've probably seen it because of articles like this in the New York Times. Mediterranean diet shown to ward off heart attack and stroke. About 30% of heart attacks, strokes, and deaths from heart disease can be prevented, the author says. Fox News weighs in with an article by a doctor, Protecting Your Heart with the Mediterranean Diet. Dallas News claims that the Mediterranean diet study rocks the medical world. And NBC News says the tasty diet cuts heart disease, study finds. So I was really curious. This sounds like great news. So what I thought I would do is take a look at the real study, the published study in the New England Journal of Medicine, and see what it says. The study was conducted in Spain and assigned 15,000 people randomly to one of 3 groups: a Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil, a Mediterranean diet plus tree nuts, or what they called the low-fat diet or the control diet. I'll frame my discussion of the results with 2 big problems. The first problem is, it turns out that all 3 diets are killers. Here's the actual data as reported in the New England Journal of Medicine. The top row, the total number of events, is simply adding up the next 3 rows, the number of strokes, heart attacks, and deaths from cardiovascular causes. They added another column, death from any cause, at the bottom. Now, to be more accurate, we're going to use not the actual numbers, but the rates of events per 1,000 people per year. So the first thing to notice here is that the only outcome in which the Mediterranean diets outperformed the control diet was the number of strokes. In fact, this data shows that the number of heart attacks is statistically the same, the number of deaths from cardiovascular causes is statistically the same, and the number of deaths from any cause is statistically the same. The only reason that the overall rate is statistically significant is because of the rate of strokes. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the rate of strokes and the rate of all these events is incredibly high in the Mediterranean diets, both with olive oil and with nuts. Human beings are not built for cardiovascular disease. Cardiovascular disease is not something that naturally happens to us and we try to prevent with diet. Cardiovascular disease is something that only happens with a diet that causes cardiovascular disease. So the fact that these numbers are so high is the real story, not that they're so low. So the second problem is that the diets weren't really different. So again, let's return to the actual data reported in the New England Journal of Medicine. And let's focus on the percentage of calories from fat in each diet. The extra virgin olive oil group averaged 41.2% of their calories from fat. The nuts group averaged slightly more, 41.5%, and the control group averaged 37% of their calories from fat. That is called the low-fat diet, which begs the question, why on earth would they choose that diet as a low-fat diet? And there's really only two possibilities. One is they felt that they couldn't get people to have less fat than that. And again, this is a randomized trial, so people were just assigned to that group. So it would be very difficult to assign people to a truly healthy diet. The second, more sinister possibility is that the researchers wanted a straw man. They wanted to have what they called a low-fat diet, but actually wasn't, so that they could prove, supposedly, once and for all, that low-fat diets don't protect you from heart disease. So just to give you a pictorial representation of the three diets, when we do a scale from 0 to 100, you can see the two Mediterranean diets are just over 40, and the low-fat diet, in quotes, is almost the same amount. Let's compare that to the standard American diet, which is actually lower in fat than the supposed low-fat diet. And just for the sake of sanity, the diet that we write about in Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition, the whole foods plant-based diet, clocks in at 10% calories from fat. That's truly a low-fat, heart-healthy diet. So perhaps the New York Times should run a correction in its next issue, changing the headline to 3 almost identically bad diets produce 3 almost identically bad health outcomes. I'm Howard Jacobson, contributing author to Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition. It's available for pre-order now, or you can pick it up at your favorite bookstore in May. Until next time, be well, my friends.
So actually, that book is available now. So I'm going to go through the analysis that he gave, but did you kind of pick up what he was talking about and how amazing it is when you actually look into the details? Now I've put in, if you go to the website, the RAV's website, you can actually download those articles. I've put the article, the New England Journal of Medicine article, and the appendix, which you need, which is also in the New England Journal, with all the raw data. But we're going to go over some of that right now. So here's the, remember he was talking about how low in fat these diets really were? So there's the total percentage of calories from fat. And the orange there is, let's see. So this is the, at the end of the trial, they're at 41.2% calories from fat, and they're the ones getting the extra virgin olive oil, which, by the way, was donated by the olive oil industry for free. And here is the nuts people. They're at 41.5% calories from fat. Remember, we're telling you if you have heart disease, you should be 10 to 15% calories from fat. So we're not really testing a low-fat diet here. In fact, here's the low-fat diet. They started at 39% calories from fat. They did go down a little bit. They went down to 37% calories from fat, which is more than most Americans consume, right? And what's interesting is the other ones actually went up. They went from 39 to 41, 39, right? So these people who are supposedly getting a heart-healthy diet are actually increasing their calories from fat. So, remember I told you we were going to talk about statistics? So p-value is made easy. Has anyone heard of a p-value before? You see it in medical articles all the time, and it's always really confusing. But I made it really simple. So a p-value is what is the likelihood of an experimental outcome being the result of chance? So at the end of each column, and I'm going to show you back, we're going to go back to the article in a minute, you'll see a p-value of 0.5 is not significant. That means the odds of the statistics that you obtained being just random is 50%. In other words, there's a 50% chance you could get a result that proved your point, or 50% chance you get the result that didn't prove your point. So that's the odds of the outcome being by chance, or 50%. If a p-value is 0.05, that's considered significant. That means there's only a 1 in 20 chance that the number you got was by accident. So 5%. So if you look at the 0.05 thing, think of that as 5%. That's how okay? So there's a 5% chance that this is not really true. That's considered pretty good. That's considered significant, but not great. What you'd like to see is a 0.01, which is considered highly significant. That means there's a 1 in a 100 chance that you got it randomly. And then, so that's 1%. And then highly significant with a p-value of 0.001 or 1 in 1,000. And the chances there are 0.1% that it's actually not accurate, that it was gotten randomly. So let's go back to the study now. And this is the PREDIMED study that we talked about, the Mediterranean diet study. Remember that acronym? Or actually, it's not an acronym. It's just an abbreviation. But a lot of medical studies will have abbreviations like there's the Jupiter trial and other trials like that. And it's easier to talk about it and remind people what study you're thinking of if you remember that, right? As opposed to trying to remember, the whole name of the article, right? So, and in that paper, they were talking about primary endpoints and secondary endpoints. The primary endpoint is what they were looking for, and the primary endpoint was the sum of all the MIs, myocardial infarctions, the heart attacks, all the strokes, and all the deaths that they think were due to either stroke or MI or a cardiovascular death. And that's the primary endpoint is up here. So in the Mediterranean diet with the extra virgin olive oil, there were 96 events in the primary endpoint, 83 with the people with nuts, and 109 in the control diet. Now you have to divide that by the number of people actually in the study for each of those groups. So those are the percentages. And if you look over here, look at this p-value, 0.009. Excellent p-value, right? It's less than 0.01. So that's a statistically significant finding for the people on the extra virgin olive oil. It's pretty significant with the nuts as well. But let's go down for a minute. So there's our that's what we're talking about there. Now let's go to our secondary endpoints. So remember, the primary endpoint is a summary of things like stroke, myocardial infarction, and deaths from cardiovascular causes. Let's look at the secondary endpoint of just stroke. And you can see that people on the control diet had more strokes than everybody else. And that was statistically significant, right? It's less than 0.05.
Ted,
yeah.
are you saying that during the 4.8 years there were people that had MIs and strokes?
Yes. During the 4.8 years, there were people who had heart attacks and strokes. And in fact, the study was supposed to go longer. But they stopped it because we had to tell people that, you really shouldn't be on this diet anymore. We need to get you off the control diet and onto giving you guzzling olive oil. So what about the myocardial infarctions? Well, there, it's not statistically significant, right? Remember, Howard said in the talk that they really had the same number of heart attacks because although the numbers are a little higher in the control diet, it's 38, it's actually 30, right? It's pretty close. And there's no statistical significance here because it's over 0.05, these numbers. So myocardial infarction doesn't count. These diets do not help you prevent a heart attack. What about overall deaths from cardiovascular causes? Again, not statistically significant. So even though the number is at the high end there, it's not statistically significant. The only way it becomes significant is if you throw the stroke part in because that was so significant. But even then, look at what we're talking about. We're talking about having the entire planet drinking gobs and gobs of olive oil so we can cut down on strokes a tiny amount, maybe. And if we look at death from any cause, again, not statistically significant. So even though we could prove that you have fewer strokes, people were still dying of other things in the experimental group. The people getting the olive oil and nuts were actually dying at a slightly higher rate or about the same rate as the people on the control diet. So what did this study actually prove? Nothing. It proves nothing. And yet everyone says, oh, I've got to be on the Mediterranean diet. Olive oil is a healthy food. I've got to drink more olive oil. And in fact, if you go to the New York Times website and look at their quiz, which I took, it asks you, do you eat 4 tablespoons of olive oil every day? And if you say no, you lose a point. So there's a reminder again. The p-value must be less than 0.05 to be significant. Were there any other problems with this study? Well, if you look at the details in the appendix, actually there were. Because the initial dietary protocol for the control group started with the delivery of a leaflet summarizing their recommendations to follow a low-fat diet and a visit once a year. So the control group was getting a leaflet once a year. What were the experimental people getting? They were getting a visit every 2 weeks. So in October 2006, this is 3 years into the trial, we realized that such a low-grade intervention might potentially represent a weakness of the trial and amended the protocol to include quarterly individual and group sessions with delivery of food descriptions, shopping lists, meal plans, and recipes. I'm sorry, it was every quarter that the experimental people had, not every 2 weeks. With delivery of food descriptions, shopping lists, meal plans, and recipes adapted to the low-fat diet in such a way that the intensity of the intervention was similar to that of the Mediterranean diet groups, except for the provision of supplemental foods for free. Right? So they realized 3 years into the study, and the study only lasted 4.8 years, they realized 3 years into the study, wait a minute, our control group's not getting as much attention from people as our experimental group. This amendment of the protocol in no way meant a change in the quality and specific goals of the recommendations to the control group. It was only an enhancement in the eagerness of the intervention to make it similar to that delivered to participants in the Mediterranean diet groups. Sounds like an apology to me, right? They realized that these groups aren't comparable anymore because we know the experimental groups all frequently do better just because they're getting more attention. So what did Dr. Ornish think? You know, Dean Ornish, one of our heroes, what did he think? So this was in the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm going to just summarize that a little bit. The PREDIMED, this is published in August. The PREDIMED study is highly flawed. The control group did not follow a low-fat diet. This is not surprising since researchers gave the control group little support in following this diet during much of the study. In the low-fat control group, total fat consumption decreased insignificantly from 39 to 37%. This level of consumption is much higher than the level recommended in American Heart Association guidelines for a low-fat diet, which is less than 30%, or a diet that can reverse coronary artery disease, which is less than 10% calories from fat, which is his diet, right? Which he actually showed that it worked. There was no significant reduction in the rates of heart attack, death from cardiovascular causes, or death from any cause. The only significant reduction was in the rate of death from stroke. But again, death from any cause, there was no significant difference. So you were still going to die. All 3 groups basically died at the same rate. The conclusion of the study should be, quote, we found a significant reduction in the rate of stroke among those consuming a Mediterranean diet as compared to those who were not making any substantial changes in their diet. A Mediterranean diet is better than what most people are consuming. Even better is a diet based on whole foods and plants that is low in fat and in refined carbohydrates. Dean Ornish, Preventive Medicine Research Institute. I mean, is that powerful or what? Just amazing. And yet, what do people think when you go out in the public? A Mediterranean diet, got to have it. Got to drink lots of olive oil. Got to eat more fish. So they did respond to his criticism. Ornish points to the fact acknowledged and discussed in our report that the participants in PREDIMED who were assigned to the low-fat diet ended up consuming a relatively high-fat diet. This finding does not detract from the view that a diet that is very low in fat has cardiovascular benefits, as shown in his study. So they're giving him credit. In fact, high-fat Mediterranean diets and low-fat vegetarian diets share a great number of food components. But major problems with a diet that is very low in fat are its poor palatability and the marginal long-term compliance. So again, what they're saying is, sure, it's the best diet, but nobody will do it. So it's our job, right, to get people to do it, because that's how we're going to save lives for real. I took this off of our website just to show you how, if you want to get information, how it works. This is our home page, and over here it should say course resources. Occasionally that course resources thing is hidden over here for some reason. We're working on that. We have, I think we have the same webmaster as Obamacare, but anyway. Actually, no, we don't, but we have me. Anyway, if you click on course resources, you end up on this page. Have people been to this yet? Okay, so if you go there, you're going to get all the handouts, right? Click here for handouts and resources for all 6 classes. But plus I put in extra resources, including things like those articles from the New England Journal. So if you want to look at those, you don't have to find them yourself. They're right there. And I've also got all 5 videos up so far. And this video that we're making tonight should be up in a few days, assuming there's no technical failures, because I don't have my video camera going right now, in case you didn't notice, which is my backup. So we'll see. What about yesterday in the New York Times? Anybody read that article about cholesterol and statins? Yeah. Okay. What about that? So they're telling you now that just take Lipitor or some statin and don't measure your cholesterol. Just figure out what your risk is for heart disease and take the damn statin because we know it's good for you. And don't even worry about what happens to your cholesterol. Even though people who might find out about our diet, their cholesterol may drop precipitously, right? But since they're not going to measure their cholesterol, the doctors will say, well, just stay on your statin anyway because, what do we know? What kind of recommendation is that? That's from the American Heart Association and one other group that got, I forget the other group, but two major medical organizations that came out with that. So let's...
The same quirky reporter.
Oh yeah, Gina Colada. Yeah, right. Right. Well, yes, she's like, be nice.
But Ted, what is the reasoning?
What is the reasoning?
Because before the previous guidelines were to go to aim for a particularly low number. Right. So the question is he's asking, previously the guideline was we're trying to get you down to a certain number, like a total cholesterol of under 150 or an HDL above 40 or I forget actually what the numbers were because I try to ignore those things. Or an LDL under, I think 180, which is really high actually. But yeah, that's what I was I just read that today. But it should be, your LDL should be under 100. But anyway, so basically patients were getting their blood levels checked, and if their cholesterol didn't get below a certain level, then they got more statin. You had to up the dose. You keep upping the dose until you get your cholesterol down to a certain level. And we can talk about that later. We can maybe get a primary care doctor here to explain that better than I just did. So anyway, but what about Lipitor, the most famous statin? What's that worth? That was worth $100 billion to Pfizer during its patented lifetime from 1998 to 2011. $100 billion. How much was broccoli worth during that time? Or kale? Or collards? Even though that stuff works better. Yeah, but Ted, why did they change the recommendation?
Why did they change the recommendation?
Yeah, why? What's the reasoning? They had all these people looking at this.
Yeah.
They seem to want you to measure it before.
They want you to measure before.
You have to plug that into the formula.
That's right. You have to plug it into the formula.
They're going to recommend it, but then they don't seem to want you to test it after that. Just keep on taking it indefinitely.
So you can't reduce it or get off it. Right?
That was basically the idea. Once you're on it for life.
Yeah, so they can sell more of their poison.
Yeah, Now it is in generic form now. So Lipitor actually is available as a generic, but there's other ones coming out that they'll tell you are better. And then there's combo drugs. So we can patent those. So I thought this was kind of fun. You probably like this. This is a comment on the New York Times website from yesterday, right? From a Rochester doctor. Well, I've left out his name. It's identified, but you can guess who it is. I don't know. Maybe. It should be pointed out that proven benefits of statins extend beyond the cholesterol-lowering properties. In fact, it may be these additional benefits that contribute greatest to those people whose cholesterol numbers are normal. So we should be taking it if your cholesterol is normal, right? As a physician in his early 70s, I began taking a statin despite normal total and LDL levels. HDL was a bit low, but not of great concern. The salutary effects of anti-inflammatory properties and augmentation of arterial elasticity were major decision makers for me. Now, many years later, other benefits have been defined, such as stabilization of cholesterol plaque. In my own instance, far from a meaningful statistic I know, carotid ultrasounds performed a decade apart demonstrated no plaque formation and improved arterial wall smoothing. Statins carry risks and side effects just like any other medications, but I believe that it may well become standard practice for people in their 40s or 50s to begin statin therapy, perhaps also in combination with a small aspirin dose. The two together, my conjecture, may save hundreds of thousands of lives. So what's really cool, I don't know if people go and look at these comments, is there's comments to the comments. Okay? So here's a comment to Rochester Doctor from Lotus Flower in Chicago. Rochester Doctor said statins carry risks and side effects just like any other medication, but I believe that it may well become standard practice for people. You saw what he said. Those are his conjectures. So what she says is, I respect the fact that you're a doctor, and I'm not, but considering the very considerable and too often irreversible side effects from taking statins, I think it would be a disaster to pass out statins to otherwise healthy 40 to 50-year-olds. A citizen in Maryland said to him, and my mother, who never took any statins, has normal cholesterol numbers and excellent arterial elasticity. She had similar ultrasounds taken. She is about your age and continues in excellent health. So based on one anecdote versus another anecdote, I'd suggest that it's a waste of money for healthy individuals to take statins. And this is Annie from Pittsburgh. I'm sorry that Rochester doctor did not get to see what statins did to my mother-in-law. It took me a while to figure out what MIL was. I thought there was some like body part. She may think it is. They are not some harmless little pill to be used just in case, but a powerful medication with serious side effects for many people and no proven value for many. He himself may find at some point that the statin he is so blithely convinced he should be using has affected him adversely. Since our bodies change, so too can our response to medications. In addition, research has shown that in some cases, muscle damage accompanies statin use but is not accompanied by symptoms. While there may be no symptoms at an early point in statin use, it would be rather difficult to predict what might happen after 30 or 40 years of use. By then, it's too late. And there's evidence that statins cause diabetes, right? I mean, that's one of the warnings that goes on the labels now.
Short-term memory loss.
And short-term memory loss. Thank you. That's another one. Yeah. That actually may be on the label too now, I think.
It is on the label.
It is.
Years ago.
Yeah. Good for you. You're a great resource.
Well, because I took it and experienced that.
Oh, okay.
And I still have it. And I attribute the drug to it, but I can't sue anybody because it could be just early onset Alzheimer's.
Yeah. And I think I have one more comment here. Suzanne from Denver. Yes, thanks to industrial medicine, it probably will be standard practice for every healthy 40 to 50-year-old to begin taking these drugs, but it certainly won't be appropriate or ethical.
I'm here to talk about health. Your health, my health, the health of your families and friends, especially our children. I'm actually here to talk about health, in fact, of our country. But talking about health, thinking about how we can get health, we are in a system today that is not exactly to our liking. I think many of you would probably agree that we have a healthcare crisis. 18% of our gross domestic product is accounted for by the money we spend for taking care of our health. In this country, the United States has the highest per capita healthcare costs in the world. We're twice as high as the next highest country. But in spite of all this money that's being spent, the quality of our health care, we've got to really face it. The quality of our health care in this country, according to the statistics and health indicators, we place us near last among similarly economically developed countries. On top of it, we've got another problem too. We've got more than 50 million people who don't have health insurance. And that's up 40% just in the last decade. This is a fantastic business model, I think you would agree. It really has been. A lot of people are making a lot of money. But as far as health, it's not a good health model. In terms of looking to the future, what's likely to come because of this problem we presently have, if the tripling of childhood obesity during the last decade, or the last 30 years, is any indication, we're not going in the right direction. Especially when we think about, too, the invasion of our children by type 2 diabetes. Used to be called adult onset diabetes. We might as well put the children thing in it, too. Or the 83% increase on a harsh drug like Ritalin in our children during the last 4 years. Something's not quite right. I'm talking about prescription drugs, by the way. At the present time, 9 out of 10 people 60 years of age and older are consuming at least one or more prescription drugs on a regular basis. I'm not one of them, by the way, and I'm more than 60. Neither is my wife taking drugs. Prescription drugs costs, on the other hand, have doubled in the last decade, and that's after we take into consideration adjustment for inflation. And on this particular point, as much as we are using prescription drugs these days, it's sort of the centerpiece of our healthcare system. It turns out it's the number 3 cause of death. Some would say number 4, depending on how you divide up the first 3. But in any case, you don't see this listed in the causes of death in most of the popular reports. Something's missing. Something is missing from our system, and that's really what I want to talk to you about. I'd like to suggest it's nutrition. We don't understand it. It's confusing. And on this question concerning nutrition, let me just do a little defining here, if I may. Nutrition, if we think of it biologically, is actually using food to maintain health and prevent disease. And the typical diet that we now, in my view, believe is the healthiest possible diet is a so-called 80-10-10 diet. Namely, it's the nutrient composition having to do with 80 parts carbohydrate, 10 parts protein, 10 parts fat on the basis of an energy basis. And that translates into a practical message. What I'm talking about now, it's a whole food, plant-based diet with little or no of the three devils, oil and fat being one, sugar and salt. That's the diet that really does create optimum health. And on that question concerning nutrient composition, by the way, nutrient composition is the index. It's the characteristic of food that best defines its effect on us in terms of health. And in terms of this nutrient composition question, antioxidants, complex carbohydrates, and vitamins those are the key elements that really give rise to health. They're all found in plants. That's what plants really are. Plants make these things. Animal foods don't make these things. We might see little antioxidants in animals from animal-based foods from time to time, but that has to do with the animals haven't eaten that kind of thing before they were slaughtered. Fat and protein are essential elements, absolutely essential elements. But it turns out that plants have around 9–11% or so of their, on average. Animal-based foods have quite a bit more. So there's the distinctive difference between animal and plant-based foods. There's another class of foods that's crept into our society too in more recent decades that has to do with processed foods. Processed foods, their nutrient composition is all over the map. It depends on how one combines pieces of the other groups of foods. Processed foods also are not good because they tend to be very high in salt, sugar, and fat, the three devils. So I come back to my main point, is whole plant-based foods that really are doing the job for us. Now, when people think about whole plant-based foods, we've known for a good long time, our grandmothers told us, our mothers told us that it prevents future disease. But it's not only about using this diet to prevent future disease, and here is the kicker. Here is the thing that really matters that the public tend not to know. It's also about using this same kind of diet to actually treat existing disease. And I think this is a really important concept because it goes right to the core of what our healthcare and medical care system is all about. Here's a list of diseases, for example, that one can find in the legitimate scientific literature, in the peer-reviewed literature. Here are diseases that have been documented to be affected by a whole food plant-based diet. That is to say, this kind of diet prevents, suspends, that means stops the further progression, or cures all of these diseases. We can now cure heart disease in fairly late stages. We can cure type 2 diabetes in a very short period of time. I have spent more than 50 years in this field as an experimental researcher, if you will, in the area of nutrition. And I want to share with you a little bit about where I came from and why I think the way I do now. It's controversial for some, but nonetheless, I really believe in the data that we've obtained. Initially, I was involved in investigating nutrients on a one-by-one basis, and still today, that's the way research tends to work, looking at one thing at a time, just one thing at a time. But over the years, I finally came to the view, and this is really where the punchline is here, this is where the power of nutrition really exists. Nutrition should be recognized as the holistic effect of countless nutrients involving countless diseases, working through countless mechanisms. Now I want to share with you just some, as I look back and sort of ask myself, how did I sort of get to this place? Because I didn't start here in my career some 50 years ago. And I want to share with you just a few observations that were taken from my own research, quite a number of years ago now, 30, 35 years ago, that kind of set the stage in a way for developing some principles that apply to what nutrition and health really is all about. This model I'm going to be telling you about in the next 3 or 4 slides here involves a laboratory animal model, laboratory rats in this particular case, that have been genetically programmed to get cancer. And so let's see what do we see. I'm interested in this particular case here to see what effect nutrition might have on that model, where the genes are there to create the disease. When we feed, in this particular case, an animal that has the ideal levels of protein, that being about 20% of total protein, when we feed a diet that is 20% diet of protein, these cancers are growing well in the first 6 weeks in those animals. In contrast, when you feed a diet of 5% dietary protein, they don't. even though they've been genetically programmed to get the disease. But this next little bit of this next observation really struck me as being quite significant. Namely, when we watch these sort of cancers growing in the first stage and switch the diet back and forth between 20% protein and 5% protein, you can see it there. We could get to a point where we could turn on and turn off cancer development, which is a very exciting concept. Because it basically says, in this case it's protein, but basically in a more general sense, it shows that nutrition controls cancer development. Very exciting concept. Instead of thinking about genes causing cancer or carcinogens causing cancer or viruses causing cancer, well, I'm talking about here in this particular case, nutrients, nutrition, basically controlling cancer development. Now, it turns out that the protein that we were using up until a certain point in time, didn't pay a lot of attention to it because it was a protein that was available for us, was casein. Casein is the main protein in cow's milk. Why is that important? Well, soy and wheat protein, for example, does not increase cancer development like does casein. Here's a couple of plant proteins not doing it, one animal protein doing it, a major difference between the two. So it suggested at that particular point in time the hypothesis that maybe animal protein would promote cancer and plant protein would prevent cancer. And that came down as a fairly general statement that I was to carry through much of my research. It turned out that's the bifurcation that really led to this distinctive differences between these two different kinds of foods. Now, as I say, this is a little troubling for me personally at the time because actually I was raised on a dairy farm. There's me up front, maybe I think it's about 9.5 years ago or so. And another just sort of sidebar story here before I go on. I talked about casein, dairy, and so forth. And so we have a lot of evidence now that dairy is a troublesome food, a very troublesome food, not just because of what we found with respect to its ability to increase cancer, but you know, my family, we don't use dairy anymore, haven't in some time. And I suggest if we want to do it right, you know, get with the program. So let's come back then to the model that I was using just to tell you about some of the principles that in fact affected me and my thinking in a larger context as we went forward. Namely, in this particular case, we're looking at just not that 5%, 20% kind of thing, but we're looking at a range of protein concentrations in the food to see what happens. And you can see here that in the lower levels of protein, dietary protein from 4 to 10% in this particular case, it's not the exact amounts I'm really concerned about here, it's the inflection that I want to talk about. But with up to about 10% dietary protein, what you can see is that protein is doing its good thing. It's not creating cancer, it's not promoting cancer. Protein is an essential nutrient, we need it. Everything's working fine. So what I'm talking about here is when we consume it in excess of the amount we need. And in fact, most of us humans actually live in that red zone where we're consuming in excess of what we need. So that 10% is enough, really is enough. And that actually is provided by a diet made up of whole plant-based foods. If we're consuming a diet of whole plant-based foods, we're actually getting the ideal levels of protein. We don't need more. But unfortunately, 95% of us, according to the national statistics, are consuming in excess of what we need, and we do that by actually consuming animal-based foods. Now I want to just take you to just another little idea here coming from these experiments that I found very interesting. Just a little schematic, so just treat it as a schematic. I've just sort of given you two clusters of cells. One cluster of the red cells, those are the ones, let's argue, let's propose, they're the genetically programmed cells to give rise to cancer. The seed has been planted. The immunogenic event has occurred, okay? Those are the cells that are programmed to get cancer. The blue cells are normal cells. So on the left, we've got a high dose, let's say a high dose of genetically prone cancer cells. On the right, we've got a far less dose, just a little bit. Now, if all else is considered equal, if nothing else has changed beyond that point, obviously the one with the highest dose of the genetically programmed cancers are going to get more cancer. Fair enough. The ones on the right get less cancer. So in that particular case, it's legitimate to say that genes cause cancer. All diseases really start with genes at some fundamental level. So in this case, we can say genes cause cancer. Sort of makes sense. However, look what happens when we get to that stage. And now, our genes are constant over a lifetime, more or less. But we go beyond the genes. If we look in this particular model here, it turns out that if you take the cells on the left, where there's a very high degree of genetic concentration of the cells, feed them the low protein diets, you get less cancer, not more. In other words, you completely just switch it. So what really matters here is not the genes. What's mattering in this particular case is the expression of those genes. That, in turn, is controlled by nutrition. And that is really one of the most fundamental properties of nutrition across the board, not just in this particular model, but in this particular model, it was actually a key. It was a key. It was a lead-in, in fact, to a larger consideration. So nutrition controls cancer genes. It controls genes across the board. It's really quite interesting for all kinds of diseases. And so we can say nutrition trumps genes. That's my view, and we have lots of evidence now to really make that point. It's something we can do about rather than something we can't do anything about. And it turns out there's a list of these same diseases, again, that all basically start with genes controlled by nutrition. So I have a question in the current conversation we're having now. If nutrition controls genes, then why are we spending so much money for genetic research? In my estimations, a rough approximation, we're spending at least 100 times the amount of funding for genetic research than we do for nutrition research. When in fact it's nutrition that actually gives us the health. It's not the genes. Genetic research, of course, makes money. Or at least there's the perception of those who are making this money available that in fact it's doing that. Nutrition research only makes health. So it comes down to this. How do we understand nutrition? As I said in the beginning, it's about looking at one nutrient at a time. And we see that every day. The recommended dietary allowance is this nutrient, you need this much, food labeling. It's actually led to a vitamin supplement industry, as a matter of fact. A $30+ billion industry. We now know that nutrient supplements really don't do the job. That's not what we need. I like to say, let's call that an old paradigm. The practice of medicine is the same sort of argument. At the present time, our health system, our medical practice system is reductionist in nature. We think about single causes, single biomarkers. You go to the doctor, he tells you how much cholesterol you have, how much blood sugar, as if these are really things that count and all by themselves. Or single diseases, that's how we give them this international classification of disease code. Doctors get paid according to what they diagnose. By our thinking of health in terms of one thing at a time, in a very narrow little context like that, what it means is, okay, well, now we're going to find one thing to cure things. We make drugs with all their side effects. That becomes the primary means of health maintenance. So I'm going to suggest we're at the threshold now. We can be at the threshold now of actually transforming the entire healthcare system and think of a different way. Think about what we can do, and that's really about nutrition. There's countless, as I said. We have to think about nutrition. This is a real challenge to the way we do research and the way we think about things. Nutrition is not a one-on-one kind of thing. It's a collective thing. We call it holism, a holistic kind of idea. It's really, quite frankly, is anathema as far as the scientific community is concerned. That's at least my experience. But that's what nutrition is. Many diseases, working as a symphony. And interestingly, this is simple. It's very complex biology, but it's a simple solution. Just decide what we should put in our mouths. A whole food plan, vegetables, fruits, grains, and legumes. Don't add back to oil, fat, and sugar. It's a lot cheaper. It really works. And as far as coming back to my initial thesis is concerned, we now have information, empirical data, to actually show that if you take a group of people, I've been involved in a couple of these tests now. If you take a group of people, give them the right food, the things that happen to us, whether we have a disease or not, are remarkable. You can see these things within a week or two. Cholesterols go down, body weight drops off. And I'm going to say that should be the future of medicine. Or let's say, I don't like the word medicine. Let's say it's the future of food and the future of our health. Thank you.
He teaches a course which I highly recommend. It's online. It's at eCornell. And if you're interested and you can't figure it out, ask me. I can explain how it works. But I took the course. It takes 6 weeks to complete. And
at the end, you become an expert on reductionism and Colin Campbell himself. So anyway, these are some slides that I borrowed from the lectures. And these are the 10 leading causes of death. And if it's in orange and has an asterisk, then there's a strong nutrition linkage. So heart disease, cancers, lower respiratory disease, that would be really smoking, but it's still lifestyle. Stroke, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, and kidney disease. And then he talks about the cost of care. While we have the most expensive healthcare system in the world, our quality of care ranks 35th to 40th. And that puts a big stress on businesses and our health as well. And where does nutrition fit in? Well, according to him, it doesn't really fit in. There's no research funding. Doctors aren't trained, and national policy and standards influenced by the food and drug industry. So this is an article from the Journal of American Medical Association from 2000, giving the annual cause of deaths because of the medical care system. And so medication errors, 7,400, unnecessary surgery, 12,000, hospital errors, 20,000, hospital-borne infections, 80,000, drug adverse effects, 106,000, so for a total of 225,000 deaths per year from medicine. Now you can argue about the numbers, right? And people do, obviously. There are people who didn't agree with that. But if you look at, if you go with those numbers, that becomes the number 3 cause of death after heart disease and cancer. So another way to look at it, which is what he's done here, he's done a conservative estimate. Let's say that 1/3 of cancers are preventable with lifestyle and dietary changes. That means we could prevent 182,000 cancers. All right? Actually, no. Actually, we'd still have 182,000 cancers. 1/3 of heart disease is 237,000. 79,000 strokes and diabetes, and half of unnecessary prescription drugs. If you eliminated those, now nutritionally controllable diseases would become the number 1 cause of death. And cardiovascular disease would drop down to 2nd, and cancers would be 3rd. I know it's a little confusing, and I'm going to show one more slide, and I'll try to explain that again. Then he said, well, that was a conservative estimate. Let's do a rough estimate where we say that actually 2/3 of cancers are preventable. So, or 2/3 of cancers are actually caused by nutrition and lifestyle. That's 370,000. 90% of heart disease is caused by nutrition. That comes to 640,000. 80% of strokes and diabetes, 190,000. And 80% of unnecessary prescription drugs, that's 83,000. If you add those all up, then you have almost 1.3 million deaths a year that are potentially preventable. Now, obviously, those people are going to die from something, and you're really just postponing the inevitable, but wouldn't that be nice? And that puts we figure the cardiovascular disease that we can't eliminate, in other words, the necessary numbers, it would be about 71,000 as opposed to 500,000. And cancers would be about 47,000. So the present paradigm, you heard him talking about the present paradigm. This is the reductionist on this side. It's reflected in food labeling, RDA's nutrient supplements, and the way we design our experiments. A paradigm for the future, which he is proposing, is the holistic approach, where we talk about nutrient interactions, food associations, and whole food effects. Reductionism, dependency on drugs, targeted therapies, nutrient supplements, treatment of symptoms with drugs that have toxic side effects. Holism would be a dependency on food, treatment and prevention of disease with no toxic side effects. In other words, drugs would become our last line of defense, right? As opposed to saying, well, if this, you're really sick and we've given up on everything, so you're going to have to try diet, which is our approach now, right? You're inoperable. You're going to have to change your diet. Reductionism, again, dependency on drugs. Looks like that's a repeat. So he's talking about a transition there. And so the paradigm for the future, dependency on food, treatment and prevention of disease without the toxic side effects. And focusing on one thing at a time leads to confusion. And these randomized clinical trials, which are considered a gold standard, really just confusing, like that one I showed you about the Mediterranean diet. That just confuses people. They come away from that. What's the one message that everybody gets from that article? Drink more olive oil. That's the only thing they take away from that, right? We also have this problem where we tend to publish favorable results. Let me skip through this because we're running out of time. So what happens when we misunderstand nutrition? We have personal health compromise. We have corruption, environmental degradation, excessive medical costs, and then we screw up our research designs. So this is a thought just to think about is investigate the details. In other words, let's be scientists about it, but let's apply the generalities. Let's not get stuck on the details. And now it's time for the intermission.
I actually made that cake one time. I didn't decorate the cake to that. All right, let's get really fast.
Carol, here, take this.
I have
Here, take this.
Oh, all right. I hate this thing. Is it on?
I think so.
Is it on?
Oh,
Yes? There's a lot of things to sample tonight. There is black bean olive dip with 2 kinds of crackers. There's Bangkok street cart noodles made with whole grain brown rice noodles. There's chocolate cake made with half whole wheat flour and half white flour, so it's at least part whole grain. There's vanilla soy milk if you want it with your cake. And there is wine, some of it brought by Ed Quick, our resident vintner and vineyard expert, so feel free to direct any wine questions to him. But the good news is if you are gluten-free and or nut-free, you can have everything tonight if you make the right choices, by which I mean I made, the dip has walnuts in it, but I made a version that has no walnuts. It has tahini, and that's in a separate container that's labeled. And of course, you know to choose the brown rice crackers if you don't want wheat. With the, now this is important, with the noodle dish, if you don't want nuts, just to save time, I sprinkled nuts on everything on the far table. So that table has nuts on it, but the samples on this table don't have nuts. But if you pick up one of those and you want nuts, there's some there to add, including more tofu and more of everything. And I hope you do take seconds if you like it. Hope you like it well enough to take more. But the important thing is if you are gluten-free, that cake has not been put out on any of the plates. If you're gluten-free, that's in a special container that's labeled, and serve yourself a piece on one of the samples that doesn't have cake on it yet. And maybe there's enough for you to try it. Even if you're not gluten-free, there's quite a bit there. And so I feel free to dive in.
Thank you. And so let's try to get back really quickly. So take food back to your seats, okay? And we'll just try to, we'll start up in about 12 minutes at 8:25, and we'll probably finish around 9:10 or 9:15. Okay, so the lazy guy that I am, I have another video to show you while I eat.
Though I was trained as a general practitioner, my chosen specialty is lifestyle medicine. Yes, most of the reasons people go to see their doctors is for diseases that could have been prevented, but lifestyle medicine is not just about preventing chronic diseases, but also about treating them. And not just treating the disease, it's treating the causes of disease. If people just did 4 simple things: not smoking, exercising half-hour a day, eating a diet that emphasizes whole plant foods, and not becoming obese, that may prevent most cases of diabetes and heart attacks, half of strokes, and a third of cancers. Even modest changes may be more effective in reducing cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, heart failure, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and all-cause mortality than almost any other medical intervention. The key differences between conventional medicine and lifestyle medicine is instead of just treating risk factors, we treat the underlying causes of disease, as described in this landmark editorial. See, typically doctors treat risk factors for disease, such as giving a lifetime's worth of medications to lower high blood pressure, elevated blood sugar, high cholesterol. But think about it. I mean, high blood pressure is just a symptom of diseased dysfunctional arteries. Yes, you can artificially lower blood pressure with drugs, but that's not treating the underlying cause, which often comes down to things like diet and exercise, the penicillin of lifestyle medicine. Disregarding the underlying cause and treating only risk factors is somewhat like mopping up the floor around an overflowing sink instead of just turning off the faucet, which is why medications usually have to be taken for a lifetime. If a floor is flooded as a result of a dripping tap, it is of little use to mop up around the floor unless the tap is turned off. The water from the tap represents the cost of disease, the flooded floor, the diseases filling up our hospital beds. Yet medical students learn far more about methods of floor mopping than about turning off taps, and doctors who are specialists in mops and brushes can earn infinitely more money than those dedicated to shutting off taps. And the drug companies are more than happy to sell rolls of paper towel, so patients can buy a new roll every day for the rest of their lives. Paraphrasing Ogden Nash, modern medicine is making great progress, but just headed in the wrong direction. Preventive medicine is, frankly, bad for business. When the underlying lifestyle causes are addressed, patients often are able to stop taking medication or avoid surgery. We spend billions cracking people's chests open, but only rarely does it actually prolong anyone's life. In contrast, how about wiping out at least 90% of heart disease? Think about it. Heart disease accounts for more premature deaths than any other illness, and is almost completely preventable simply by changing diet and lifestyle. And those same changes can prevent or reverse many other chronic diseases as well, the same dietary changes. So why don't more doctors do it? Well, one reason is doctors don't get paid to do it. Right? For no one profits from lifestyle medicine, so it's not part of medical education or practice. Presently, physicians lack training and financial incentives, so they continue to do what they know how to do, prescribe medication and perform surgery. After Dean Ornish proved you could reverse our #1 cause of death, heart disease, open up arteries without drugs, without surgery, just with a plant-based diet and other healthy lifestyle changes, he thought that his studies would have a meaningful effect on the practice of mainstream cardiology. After all, a cure for our #1 killer? But he admits he was mistaken. Physician reimbursement, he realized, is a much more powerful determinant of medical practice than research. Reimbursement more than research. Salary over science. Wealth versus health. Not a very flattering portrayal of the healing profession, but hey, if doctors won't do it without getting paid, let's get them paid. So Dr. Ornish went to Washington, arguing that, look, if we train and pay for doctors to learn how to help patients address the real causes of disease with lifestyle medicine, not just treat disease risk factors, we could save trillions, and that's just talking heart disease, diabetes, prostate, and breast cancer. The Take Back Your Health Act was introduced in the U.S. Senate to induce doctors to learn and practice lifestyle medicine, not only because it works better, but here's the critical factor: physicians will be paid to do it. The bill died, just like the millions of Americans will continue to do with reversible chronic diseases.
So just another little metaphor here. Has to do with fences, cliffs, and ambulances. And think of fences as prevention. It's what you put at the top of the cliff to keep people from falling off. And the cliff is the modern diet and lifestyle. And the ambulance is modern medicine. So what we have is a system now where people are falling off the cliff, but we have really good ambulances that pick them up and take them to the hospital, right? And that's where we put our money, because obviously if you fall off a cliff, you'd like to have a good system in place, right? That someone's going to come rescue you. So it makes sense, and you're acutely ill or injured, you need to have someone come rescue you. And that's far more interesting than putting up the fence, right? It's just not that exciting to have a fence. In fact, if you went to a cliff that had a fence, you'd say, who put this fence here? I want to look down. So this is just so you'll have something to remember. These are some cliffs. Here's an ambulance. There's another fence. These are people falling off the cliff, going over the fence. There's another fence. There's another fence. I like this. If you Google fences, you get some really nice pictures. This one's my favorite. And here we go. Of course, this is what happens to ambulances. Sometimes they don't make it to the hospital. So when was the last time you thanked someone or paid them for something bad that didn't happen? In other words, you didn't fall off a cliff. So that's the problem, right? It's just not that interesting. It's basically Barnett's second law, which is nobody gets credit for bad things that don't happen. Like I've said before, if on 9/11 the FBI had figured out the plot, right, and the World Trade Centers didn't come down, would we be sitting here 10 years later saying, wow, we really dodged that bullet? No, we wouldn't know. And nobody could convince you that that anything had actually happened. And the same thing happens with prevention. If 30 years from now you don't get heart disease because of something I told you, big deal, right? What have you done for me lately? You have a question?
Isn't the medicine system in China based on paying your doctor to keep you healthy?
So the question is the medical system in China based on paying your doctor to keep you healthy? I've heard that. I don't know if it's true, but I've heard that. Yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah, they should hold doctors accountable like they do teachers now.
Mm-hmm.
It has been taught in the
Yeah.
schools for many years. Now they're accountable for how the students perform.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be how your patients
Right.
perform.
So based on performance, of course, that's problematic too, because if you're taking care of people who don't, are less likely to cooperate, you get penalized, right?
Right, and that's what happens.
That's what happens to school teachers if you want to go, right? So we'll come back to that in the Q&A. That's a really good point. But I got to get one more little speech from Howard Jacobson, okay?
Hi, I'm Howard Jacobson, contributing author to Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition. And today I'd like to talk to you about a really interesting study that I'm titling, When Vegans Eat Steak. So we've heard for years that the problem with eating meat is the cholesterol and the fat that's contained in it. So it would stand to reason if that's the problem, then we can solve it by eating lean cuts of meat. However, this study shows that it's not that simple. And the reason is this new chemical, TMAO, new to us, trimethylamine N-oxide, can encourage the growth of fatty deposits on the walls of arteries. Now here's where it gets interesting. The study compared meat eaters and vegetarians and vegans in whether the TMAO spiked after eating meat. And it found that a vegan did not show the same spike in levels of TMAO after eating a 200-gram sirloin steak. In other words, what they ate was less important than how they had been eating in the past. And the analysis showed that the vegans and vegetarians had, quote, very different types of bacteria in their guts. So Dr. Hazen, the chief researcher on this study, concluded that eating meat regularly promotes the growth of intestinal bacteria that turn carnitine in red meat into TMAO. And the thing about TMAO is that it leads to deposits on arterial walls. So carnitine on its own didn't seem to cause the problem, but when combined with TMAO, it turned people into, quote, prime targets for heart disease. The first point is that nutrition is complex. It is jaw-droppingly complex. And we're used to thinking about nutrition the way we might have learned it in school, like vitamin A is for eyesight, eat your carrots so you can see well, and that everything we eat is reducible to a specific bunch of nutrients, and each nutrient does a thing in our bodies. Vitamin C fights colds, vitamin E is for the immune system, vitamin A is for eyesight, that we think that way. And it really isn't the case, because here we see it's not just about the consumption, what we're consuming, it's about how we're absorbing it and how we're processing it. And that makes things way more complex. Important point number 2, follow the money. So we're going to see a very predictable research agenda from this study. Can you guess what it is? Is it about how to help people transition to a plant-based diet away from so much meat? Nah. Gina Colada writes in the New York Times that the researchers say the work could lead to new treatments for heart disease, perhaps even an antibiotic to specifically wipe out the bacterial culprit. In other words, we can still eat carnitine, we can still have our red meat, but if we change the bacteria, if we kill that one little bacteria in our gut that happens to turn it to TMAO, then we can cure heart disease. Antibiotic. Really? Has anybody heard of drug resistance? And do we really want some more drug-resistant intestinal bacteria? Yeah, that's just what we need. If only there were another way that didn't have such a horrifying downside. Oh wait, there is. Eat better. But of course, where's the profit in that? Where is the excitement and the research agenda of looking for that one bacterium in our gut that's the guilty thing, that's causing the change from carnitine to TMAO that leads to atherosclerosis? Important point number 3, the low carbers are going to spin this because they don't like where it's going, so they're going to try to figure out ways to show us that this study doesn't mean what it means. So Chris Kressler writes that it's not yet time to switch over to soy burgers because, he writes, the mistaken blame of saturated fat and cholesterol as drivers of heart disease led to a decades-long campaign to encourage low-fat diets, and so we were deprived of nourishing and delicious foods like meat, butter, and eggs. That whole low-fat didn't work, caused obesity, heart disease, and diabetes is a straw man because there was no shift to a low-fat diet in the United States. Second, why is a mistake to blame saturated fat and cholesterol as drivers of heart disease? What causes what? So one theory, cholesterol and saturated fat lead to heart disease. That was the result of the Framingham Heart Study and Ansel Keys' work, and pretty much every reputable study has found a link between cholesterol, saturated fat, and heart disease. Another possibility is it's the TMAO that leads to heart disease, and the cholesterol and saturated fat were just implicated. They were just along for the ride, and we kind of got it wrong, and so we should be welcoming those back into our diet. Another possibility is it's the carnitine that causes heart disease, and we saw here that carnitine doesn't seem to directly lead to heart disease, but it needs to be converted to TMAO by those nasty little intestinal bacteria that meat eaters have and vegans don't seem to. Or it's cholesterol and saturated fat may lead to an intestinal environment that grows bacteria that convert carnitine to TMAO. Okay, just stop already. We'll never find the cause because there's no such thing as the cause in nature. This is so complex. Getting back to point number one, this is so complex. It's a system, and you can't change a complex system by fiddling with tiny little reductionist parts of it. We're never going to fix this with antibiotics. We're never going to fix this with some drug that's going to block the conversion of carnitine to TMAO. You only fix problems like this by changing the system at its fundamental level. I'm Howard Jacobson, contributing author to Whole, Rethinking the Science of Nutrition, available wherever books are sold and available for pre-order at the web address listed on this page. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, my friends.
Like I said, we're running behind a little bit, so we were going to do some more label reading, but I'm going to skip through this really quickly because I know you wanted to do that, but I'll do it really fast. How's that? So these are some zesty meatballs by Nate's, and we're going to, remember we learned about always look at the back because that's where the ingredients are. Never trust the front. So this is basically a health food, right? Because it's vegan. But look at how much the percent calories from fat. It's 50% calories from fat. Remember, what was the rule about sodium? We wanted it to be, whoops, what happened there? No more than twice the, did I do the math? So it shouldn't be more than twice as many milligrams of sodium as there are calories in the food. So this has 90 calories and 340 milligrams of sodium. So that's pretty high in sodium, actually. It's more than twice. Obviously, twice would be 180. It's almost 4 times. How about this Progresso soup? This is lentil soup, really healthy. Look at the ingredients. It's great. It's got less than 1% of salt, right? So, but look at the calories. It's actually quite low in calories from fat, right? It's only less than 10% or less, and 12%, right? And it's only got 1% calories of salt, right? But it's actually 810 milligrams of salt. So remember the rule about percentage? You can't compare percentages, right? That's just weight. So that means nothing. Because people look at it and say, oh, it's only got 1% of the salt I need, and I'm allowed. So it's very high in salt compared to the number of calories. How about quinoa flakes? What's in quinoa flakes? Quinoa. That's pretty cool, right? Remember this thing? Just forget that. Just don't even pay any attention to that. It just doesn't mean anything. It's impossible to interpret. So how many calories from fat? And how much sodium? Whoops, sorry. Let me go back there. I'm going too fast. I'm trying to get through this. So only 2 milligrams of sodium, right? That's pretty amazing for 130 calories. So it's way less than 1 to 1, right? And so this is a whole food. Whole foods are good. These crackers, we'll skip this. Turns out they're not as healthy as you think. But oh yeah, sorry. Carol loves them. I knew that would happen.
You're feeding us?
I know, exactly. These are transition foods. No, they're good foods. So it's 32% calories from fat, but a lot of that fat may not actually be absorbable because it's actually got flaxseed in its whole form. So it's all from seeds. Right. There's no added oils. That's the other thing.
So this is kind of whole food. This really is whole foods. There's no fractionated food in here. Is there salt? Well, you want to get your whole total diet down to 15%, 10 to 15% calories from fat. Certainly if you have heart disease, down closer to 10%. So it depends what you put on these crackers, right? Because these are 32% calories from fat, but if you put something on here that's got no fat or very low in fat, then that would average out. So you can kind of play that game a little bit. Well, I can't speed through, this is the cartoon section. I can't speed through these. So, okay. You remember who said that? That was if they can get you to ask the wrong questions, then they don't have to worry about the answers. I showed you that at the beginning. And so what are some, this is the vegan outreach position, because I want you to kind of not get too scared off, or when you're talking to people, not get too scared off. So what are some hidden animal ingredients? Well, that's the question you shouldn't be asking. That's the wrong question, because what they say is, in general, we recommend that vegans concentrate their attention on the most obvious animal ingredients. Instead of getting bogged down by reading lists for every possible animal-derived ingredient, our experience has been that many vegans burn out because they are worn down by the details, missing the true meaning of veganism. Concentrating on processing or on trace ingredients can make a vegan diet appear exceedingly difficult and dissuade people from adopting it. So really, that's just for level 5 vegans. Those are vegans who don't eat anything that casts a shadow. All right, here's a question. Uh-oh, I gave you the answer. How many vegans does it take to change a light bulb? Why? I made this up, by the way. One to hold the light bulb, and the other to read the label. Very good, exactly. Later on, you're going to find out how many meat eaters it takes to change a light bulb, but I'm not going to tell you that yet. So moderation. So this is going back to vegan outreach. One approach is to start with a moderate vegan diet and transition gradually to a more rigorous vegan diet. In other words, become vegan, but don't have to go for the whole 10% calories from fat thing right away, because you'll think, well, this is terrible. Because your taste buds have to change, right? And now when I eat something that's whole fat, it really doesn't taste right to me. If it's got added oils, it just doesn't taste right. Or salt. I notice a lot of things taste salty to me now that just didn't used to. So, and our family, we've continued to improve every year. So one of the things you might want to do is, if you want to persuade others, you want to persuade us, snag others, right? So you just want to use transition foods, veggie burgers, not dogs. And you're probably more likely to adhere to the diet in the long term. That's the theory of vegan outreach anyway. Because this is our problem, right? The problem is people get it, but they just can't stick with it. Who says moderation kills? That's Caldwell Esselstyn says that. He also says that prevention is not as strict as reversal. So when he says you can't have any nuts or avocados if you have heart disease and you're about to go under the knife, he also says you can have, if you're not in that position, you can have a handful of nuts once a day, or throughout the day. So, less than 30 grams of nuts a day would be acceptable if you're on a reversal diet, on a prevention diet. It's amazing how much that handful of nuts, though, will raise your percent calories from fat. It'll probably take you from 10% up to 20% calories from fat, just a handful, right? Because it's 200 calories. And if you're on a 2,000 calories a day diet, then that's 10% of 2,000. So, but that's whole food again. All right, now we're going to talk about some fun stuff. You've probably heard about the Vegetarian Summerfest. It's one of the ways that we know all these people. And this is an ad for last year. There's going to be an ad for next year coming out shortly. It takes place once every year, in usually the first week of July, in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And these are some. There's Neil Barnard, Colleen Patrick Goudreau. Sorry. Yeah, right. These are all. And all these people have come to RAVS. He's been to RAVS or been to Rochester. We just had her this year. We've had Brenda Davis. This is our family sitting around. Various family members. These are all happy vegans. People wonder why they haven't changed it to the North American Vegan Society. It's just because it's just too complicated. You'd have to change all their letterhead, right? There's Will Tuttle, who's a PhD and Buddhist monk. And there's George Eisman, and there's his daughter. Cafeteria's coming. That's the cafeteria it takes place in usually. These are people from Rochester with their kid.
Again, this is the gang. You can see how miserable we are. This is all the food. There's so much food. It's ridiculous. And you don't have to ask what's in it. Right? Unless you're and if you're nut-free or gluten-free, they have different lines for those. So you can go to have all this stuff. There's a raw line. So I usually go to all the lines. I definitely don't lose weight at this. Family members again and lots of friends. All 3 women are from Rochester. Rochester usually has a really good turnout, so don't let us down. Some of you should come.
What month is this?
It's the first week of July, usually. It's right around July 4th weekend. These are some famous vegans. There's Howard Lyman, the Mad Cowboy. And he was the one who was tried along with Oprah. And they won, right? And then Lori Houston, who used to be Lori Boston when she was with the guy from Farm Sanctuary. They started together. There's yours truly and my evil twin. Anybody recognize this guy?
You should be on TED.
His name is Seamus Davy Fitzpatrick, and you may know him from this. He's Damien from The Omen. Yeah. He's actually a really sweet kid, but every time I see him, I get the willies. One year he injured his elbow. I got to read his X-ray. This is the kids up on stage with one of the singers. Oh my God, that was Nathaniel. Hang on. That little guy was Nathaniel. My son. That must be like 12 years ago, or 10 years ago. Here they are on a panel of vegan children. There's Elizabeth, Nathaniel, and Rebecca. Anybody recognize him? That's right. There's John McDougall. There's a puppet show. John Pierre, he was at the Rabs meeting earlier last month or the month before. Kyle Vincent's a singer. I guess singing at the Kids Center is my daughter. Not related, just cute kids. No, it's not. That's no, it's the other kid. Oh, yeah. It's a Seamus look-alike. Anybody recognize her? She's been to our meetings. That's Ray Sikora. She is an amazing person. She actually goes to the Middle East to try to negotiate between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And she's just remarkable. She's a lovely person. What's the name of her organization? The Institute of...
Plant Peace Daily.
Right, Plant Peace Daily. But before that, she was to the Institute of Humane Education up in Maine. So there you go. There's Caldwell Wesselston. Amy Hamlin from Ithaca, she's the Healthy School Lunch Program. There's Will Tuttle, who is the World Peace Diet bestseller, actually, on the New York Times website, or list. There's Rebecca playing the piano on stage. There's Will Tuttle again. He's amazing. He's also actually a wonderful pianist. He basically has whole other career as a pianist. Anybody recognize him? Probably not. But he's Don Ferraro, who's the creator of Bizarro, which is this nationally syndicated cartoon. And actually, at one time, his girlfriend, or was he married to her, was the woman who was the model for Lisa Simpson on The Simpsons. So she was, because she was, remember Lisa Simpson became vegan? Who recognize these people? So there's Howard Lyman. That's the Mad Cowboy. And there's T. Colin Campbell, our Jedi Master. Question, I'll skip through that. There's the kids up on stage after their performance. Look, all the parents in the front row. About 600 or 700 people go to this. So this takes place on a college campus. It's a huge, uses a full theater for the plenary sessions where everybody goes, and there's breakaway sessions in the various classrooms around the campus. Little vegan, gluten-free family. Here's at the Service for the Animals on Sunday morning. It's over on Sunday, and every year for the last probably 12 or 15 years, we've been having a little service. It's ecumenical, non-denominational, and the Barnetts provide the music. That's why I'm back there. Here's George Eisman taking people on a wild food hunt. This is a picture of my bird watching crowd. If you get up early enough, like, is it 6 a.m.? I think I start at 6. Yeah, I can't believe that.
I take about 20 or 30 people out birding in the morning. And this guy is, what's his name? Jonathan Balcom, right? He's also a well-regarded author who's published several books on animal behavior. And he is vegan, and he speaks, he's wonderful. He talks about, you know, we're so interested in, we have literature about animal pain, but what about animal pleasure? And so he writes a lot about that. So again, here's the Vegetarian Summerfest. Highly recommend that you consider going. What about RAVS? We're the Rochester Area Vegetarian Society, right? We were founded in 1989 by the revolutionaries, Rhoda and Stan Sapone. We've kept it going. Carol and Ted are the bureaucrats who've kept it going. We've met every month since we were founded. We have a newsletter, The Vegan Advocate. It's published every quarter. It was the Vegetarian Advocate until... did you pass it out? Oh, good. Oh, you just got it. Okay, good. Yeah, it just came out again. We have about 200 members. We host nationally known speakers several times a year. We staff many outreaches a year, way more than a dozen probably, probably 30. And the number keeps rising. We meet the third Sunday of every month. And if you want to make a donation, it would be tax deductible. So here's a summary of what you just lived through the last 6 weeks or experienced. The healthiest diet. The preponderance of evidence points to unprocessed plant foods, no dairy, no flesh, including fish, no eggs, no animal products. And we have a vegan My Plate, not to be outdone by the USDA, and that's what it looks like, which is basically the same as the PCRM's Power Plate. Okay, how many meat eaters does it take to change a light bulb? Any guesses? None. Why? They'd rather stay in the dark. So after I've tried to convince you that it's what a healthy diet is, what if this wasn't such a healthy diet? What if from a health standpoint the diet we recommend is only equivalent to and not superior to an animal-based diet? Are there other reasons? Well, our current animal-based system of feeding humans is unsustainable. The Earth can support only 2 billion humans eating this way. We have 7 billion and we are growing. It contributes more to global warming than any other source. It's responsible for massive ongoing deforestation. In the Amazon, 70% of once forested land is used for grazing. And it's responsible for unspeakable cruelty to animals, which we don't even like to think about. But worldwide, 50 billion animals are killed each year, and that's 2,000 every second. And in the US, farm animals raised for food consume 90% of the soybeans and 80% of the corn. Animal-based agriculture uses vast amounts of water, causes massive water pollution, is responsible for ocean dead zones. Industrial fishing is destroying marine ecosystems, is completely unsustainable. Fish farms are even worse, as I showed you. Here's an example of a hog farm waste lagoon in North Carolina. Another one in Georgia. So this is what happens when you have a factory farm. You've got to get rid of all this waste, right? The whole food plant-based diet causes the least environmental damage, it minimizes cruelty to animals and people, and prevents and reverses the most common diseases. It empowers people by putting them in charge of their own health. If adopted by all, it would be far more to improve our health than the modern healthcare system. And it would be a heck of a lot cheaper. So what are we waiting for? It's the only logical answer. So thank you all. As promised, we have time for questions. It's 9 o'clock, so I know people have to leave, and that's fine. But we'll probably stay the whole day, 9:15, with questions. Yes?
Ted, I think in Ornish, original study, he actually had like 3 times a week mindfulness meditation. So Dean Ornish's original study had a lot about mindfulness meditation, and there was a group of community that they met, and they learned how to, like, stress reduction. And I know for me, I'm more apt to maintain a healthy plant-based nutrition diet. The more time and spaciousness I have in my life, the slower I go, the more mindful I am. And I think when I think about how to incorporate this into my life,
Right.
I realize that I have to create that kind of energy in my life. Otherwise, I'm going to get stressed and run to Mickey D's, let's say.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So how do you? I don't know if you've adapted into that, evolved into that, because you're obviously a physician. We have stressful lifestyles, etc. What are your thoughts on that? The commentary I just made.
So that's a great. You can keep that because I haven't.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. It's a great question. The question really is. Well, actually, it's two questions, right? Because you mentioned the fact that Ornish had the mindfulness meditation as part of his program. I think it was once a week, but they, taught people how to do it. I thought you were going to say, how do we know that's not the most important part of it? But
I'm saying I think it's additive.
But it's additive, yeah. and Dean Ornish certainly feels that way, that it's additive, that it's all part of it. Well, I'm going to break that down into two answers. One is Caldwell Esselstyn, basically in his program said, people have only so many what they call behavior modification units, or BMUs, he called them. And so he said, I'm just going to do the diet. He said, there's nothing wrong with exercise and there's nothing wrong with stress management. Those are great things, but let's just do the diet and see what happens. So he did it just with a diet. He said, I want people on 10% calories from fat. And he was just as successful, quite honestly, as Ornish in heart disease prevention and reversal. But the other part of your question is, how do we incorporate this into our lives, really? And that, I think, is the big question. Because so often you hear from the insurers, from physicians, well, yes, this would be great if you could get people to do it, but they're never going to do it. In fact, I've heard that from cardiologists. 10 years ago, I had a cardiologist tell me, yes, the vegan diet, the low-fat vegan diet is by far the best thing you can do, but nobody will do it. So it's not that this knowledge isn't kind of out there. A lot of people know about it. I think there's a lot of people know about it but don't really believe it. And you have the low-carb people throwing in their, the monkey wrench that's kind of confusing people, and articles like the Mediterranean diet confusing people, the Mediterranean diet article. But I think everyone has to work it out on their own. And honestly, I don't have an answer. I've worked it out on my own. Basically, Carol cooks for me and packs my lunch every day. So your wife isn't here, is she? Yeah.
I'm working on it.
I'm working on it.
You're working on it, yeah. So truthfully, it is hard to go out to eat. There's no question about that. For what do? I have my lunch every day is actually I nibble while I work. I can do that in the way I work. And for lunch, my lunch break actually is stress reduction. I go take a nap and meditate. So I take about 30 to 40 minutes. I'm known for that in my practice. Where's Barnett? Oh, he's out in his car. He's out in his car. And I just, I come in early and I leave late. So the fact that I take an extra hour in the middle of the day or 45 minutes, that's just the way it is, And I'm not planning on retiring either. So I knock on wood, I don't want, I'm not sure about my colleagues. So I think everybody has to work it out on their own. It's something I actually would really like to talk about at some point with this group, is suggestions, because I think it's different for everybody. And when we put together a program, that we actually do some research. I'm going to segue into, since you brought up heart disease, I would like to do some research in Rochester where we actually get some heart disease patients and actually do a controlled study where we randomize people. And I've got some ideas about that. So if anybody wants to talk to me about that later, we certainly could. Yeah. Other questions?
I want to take it real quick.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jane. I know that there was some interest in regards to a vegan nutritionist or registered dietitian. I happen to know a very good friend. Her name is Joy. And if you're interested, come to me and I will give you her number.
She is wonderful. Joy Valvano?
She is
wonderful. She's great. Yeah. She's a member of RAVS.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And she actually teaches a class that's actually more of a cooking class at Unity called Seeds for Change. So if you want to kind of continue on with a different kind of a class, it's less kind of the cerebral stuff that we do and more about just practical hands-on cooking. And I've actually given some talk to their class as well.
Any other question?
Any other questions? You can yell from the back. You don't have to have a microphone.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have to go. Well, you have my email.
Yeah, absolutely.
The numbers don't work.
Right,
So
this
the
one,
numbers,
right,
but
okay.
just for the email. So, you know,
I'll vouch that you watch the videos online for the credits.
oh, okay. But the thing is,
Did you sign all the sheets, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was.
That one I'm going to defer completely to Carol.
There's some of you may know this. There's a product called whole wheat pastry flour that rises the same way that white flour does, but it is a whole wheat product, and you can get it in. Well, you may be able to get it in bags in Nature's Marketplace. You can get it in bulk at Lori's and Abundance. Probably you can get it in
Tadco Bob's Red Mill.
whole wheat pastry flour. Whole wheat pastry flour, and you can use it one for one the way you would regular white flour, like in a cake or anything you want to rise. One thing I do sometimes, I kind of like to be able to use things that are easily found. So if I have whole wheat flour and I do have unbleached white flour in the house, I'll just mix them half and half.
Right.
And you can use that mix pretty much the same way you would use whole wheat pastry flour, and it's 50% whole wheat and 50% unbleached white flour. But if you want to be purist, you can get the whole wheat pastry flour. And it should be better.
Yes.
It's
Mine's
ironic.
sort of a, esoteric question.
The vegan
Going to these
materials,
conferences, seeing
which
these
should be
doctors,
dirt cheap.
these plant-based conferences, grassroots but spreading.
Right.
Do we have hope that this will become, you know, the standard?
Yes.
So, yeah.
But it will take a long time.
Right, did everyone hear the question?
Pardon?
Going to all these conferences where it's kind of a grassroots and we're hearing these doctors, do we have hope that this is going to spread? Well, there's reason to hope, and then there's reason to be pessimistic. The reason to hope is that, you know, I think we're reaching, it feels like we're reaching kind of a tipping point where this is almost becoming common knowledge. And, you know, those of us who've been involved for a long time almost feel afraid that we're not going to get credit anymore, right? People are going to say, so tell me something new, right? You know, it's like, which is great, right? It may just take off on its own, which would be fabulous. In practical terms, how is that going to work? I'm not really sure. The thing that you have to remember is there's going to be a huge blowback because there's a lot of industries that are going to be threatened by this. And each one of them will make their own claims about why this isn't true. So, you know, we're subsidizing all this corn, right? Well, if we stop subsidizing corn, there's going to be some industries that are going to be really unhappy about that.
Billions of animals a day.
Right, and then
Right.
how many
Same
billions of
with the
animals a
factory
day?
farming.
The factory farms, they're going to be fighting back. And the fisheries, they're going to be fighting back. The dairy industry, we already know. The dairy industry is actually, they've actually had to back down a little bit already, which is kind of encouraging. So I think that's why, one of the reasons when I explain this to you, I'm also trying to train you how to argue, right? Because expect it, it's going to come back. Because anybody whose business is threatened is going to fight. I would fight, right? Everybody fights when their own livelihood and business is threatened. It's just natural. So it's just part of the process. We just have to expect that.
The social.
Because we were talking about Thomas Campbell, Colin
Right.
Campbell's son,
Right.
who just is now practicing it strong, and you said
Right.
he's running a regular practice, but nutrition's part of
Right.
his, you know, doctrine. But the thing is that he knows what his father has proven.
Right.
It's like he should, you know, the
He,
bullhorn.
yeah, he is. And like I said, one day a week he's head of the T. Colin Campbell Foundation. But that article I showed you that was from the Journal of Kaiser Permanente, that's huge. Because if an insurance company like that thinks that it's going to be in their interest,
Yeah.
right, to get their patients to eat that way, then we may make some progress. It's a shame that it has to be that way. It always bothers me when the reason people do the right thing is because of money. Because I feel like that it's very easy to subvert that. But it is the right thing, and if it also happens to make people money, well.
It's almost like if the compassion came first, then all this would be self-correcting. So a lot of it.
Which just appears if the compassion came first, then this would all be self-correcting. But we're not at that point yet.
Well, everything's so hidden, like that video you showed last week.
Right.
That should be like mainstream, but it's not. I
Which?
mean, the Mercy for Animals,
Oh,
the
yeah.
chicks.
The chicks, right.
I mean, that and 100 like it should be mainstream.